Hello, I'm Sophia State, and this is the absolute state of the research. Joining us today is the wonderful Dr. Ruth Barrett-Peacock. Ruth, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ruth Barrett-Peacock. I'm currently at the university in Jena, the Friedrich Schilling University, and I'm researching primarily the representation of Western classical music in film and other media from Europe, but also Japan and Australia. Now, my interest here in Kamen Rider is primarily on what the show does in terms of sound and spatial hermeneutics, because it does some really, really interesting things when it comes to that and combining this with children's play. And what we actually want to unpack today together, Sophie and I, is sort of the process of play and melodrama and making space, and start to think about what this means for children's use of media and its relationship to space. And because, as I mentioned, melodrama is a key aspect of this, Sophia is now going to talk about Kiva as a Gothic melodrama, and then we're going to look at the toy and play as third space in the second half of the presentation. So over to you, Sophie.
Thank you. Yeah, so look, there's a lot of stuff we're going to be talking about today that we won't have time to really sort of explain or fill in the details, but hopefully there's some publications coming out of this that we can point you to if you're interested. So we're talking about Kamen Rider Kiva, which is the 2008 season of Kamen Rider, and it has a vampire theme. It has these two sort of parallel intertwined story arcs, one that takes place in the 1980s and one in the 2000s, and they're tied together by a violin named the Bloody Rose. In the 1980s storyline, the violin is created by a vampire hunter and the vampire queen he falls in love with. And in the 2000s storyline, their son is alerted by the playing of his parents' now haunted violin to his duty to defend humanity from vampire attacks. Using the bite of his fat sidekick to transform into a Kamen Rider hero, he reluctantly rides out to save the day. And I'm assuming that if you're watching this video, you're a bit familiar with Kamen Rider, but if you're not, it's from the same sort of lineage as Power Rangers. And like that program, every season has a different theme and characters, but consistent features include the need to sell toys. So every Kamen Rider uses a combination of a morphing, or in the Japanese, a henshin device, and various weapons that can be then sold as toys. But the belt, the henshin belt, this transformation device, is the thing that we're really interested in talking about today. So getting back to the idea that it's a Gothic show, I don't just mean that in kind of the pop culture sense that because it's vampires, it's a bit gothy, you know, he wears tight black pants. I also mean it in a more sort of literary studies sense. So Helen Wheatley, for example, describes menacing domestic situations and family secrets as common characteristics of Gothic television. Along with, and this is a quote, perhaps most importantly, homes and families which are haunted, tortured, or troubled in some way, end quote. And these are very strong themes in Kiva. So when he takes the mask off, the protagonist, and I'm talking about Wataru if you're familiar with the show, is a painfully shy and lonely young man who's grown up without a family in this haunted, overgrown mansion. And all he wants to do is work on making violins and immersing himself in music, but he's constantly hounded into battles by this kind of insistent strumming of the violin that comes from his parents' legacy. Lots of spoilers for Kiva. I'm sorry, we've already given some, but so as the story unfolds, the complexity of this legacy becomes clearer. The vampire queen, who's his mother, endures domestic violence from the vampire king, and that's before she starts the affair with the human, who will be Kiva's father. But once again, once the affair is revealed, she becomes an outcast from vampire society, and she's constantly hunted and tortured. And there's this devastatingly sad story arc involving the reunion between Kiva, Wataru, and his full vampire half-brother, in which both of them struggle to come to terms with their relationship to each other, to the mother who abandoned them both, and their respective fathers who actually died fighting one another. And so Kiva is a Gothic story, but as with other seasons of Kamen Rider, it's also programmed in the melodramatic mode. And this is a mode that's heteroglossic. So it has musical and music-like speech, spectacular visuals, gestures, choreography that carries emotion. But really importantly, it kind of embodies and enacts drama and personal crisis. I'm referring to Gledhill and Williams there. So Kamen Rider combines all of these elements in the melodramatic mode with the key addition of this toy. So the combination of the music, the choreography, and the medium of the toy itself is kind of what we want to talk about, the object of our study in examination. In connection with melodrama.
Here, what's kind of the interesting point for me is that the toy that we're talking about as being a prop in this film or in this television series is the same actual physical object as parents can buy for their children, or kids can buy with their pocket money if they have a lot of pocket money, and more importantly, that children can use to actually play with, to do imagination play in their home or in the schoolyard or in different spaces. So when the kid is sort of imagining this moment of henshin, this moment of transformation and empowerment that the main character goes through, they're doing this using this toy and using the toy that has the same sounds and that facilitates the same choreography as we were seeing in this very melodramatic, television program that Sophia just described. So what the toy is enabling the protagonist to do in the show is, in perhaps a different form and a more realistic form, enabling the child to do outside of the show. So Sophie's just going to talk a little bit about what it means, perhaps in that sense, to to be a kid, and how that relates to the feelings that are expressed in this show, right?
Yeah. So we haven't been able to find very much research about melodrama as a mode, but there's a lot that's been written about the childhood and the Gothic, which is closely related to melodrama. So going back to Peter Brooks, quote, "Melodrama shares many characteristics with the Gothic novel, and not simply in the subjects that were traded back and forth between the two genres. It is equally preoccupied with nightmare states, with claustration and thwarted escape, with innocence buried alive and unable to voice its claim to recognition," end quote. And I think even in the absolute best, most loving of circumstances, children really are subject to arbitrary control in every little detail of their lives, from what they eat and when, who they're allowed to play with, what colour their socks are, the sounds they're permitted to make, the ways they're permitted to move their bodies. These are all things that adults have complete control over. And they experience what Francis Waxler calls, quote, "the hard times of childhood," end quote. And these are things that seem unremarkable to adults, but are experienced as being difficult by children themselves. And she, one of the informants from her ethnographic research, gave this account, quote, "Do not bite your nails, do not crack your knuckles, do not slouch in your chair, do not spill your milk, do not mash your your peas, do not wear through the knees of your good pants. I also recall wondering if there was anything that I could do," end quote. So claustration, thwarted escape, and this feeling of being buried alive and unable to voice a claim to recognition are, I would argue, emotions at the heart of being a child and what that experience feels like. And the protagonist of Kiva really embodies those feelings, but he's able to access power through his henshin toy. Belt. He develops this inner strength and resilience that kind of help him to match emotionally the physical power that the bat and the belt give him. And we'll drop a link to another YouTube video where you can actually watch the first episode of Kiva and see what that henshin looks like.
Yeah, exactly. But I think this is sort of the key point here, isn't it? So the hero using this prop, or is it a toy? He's able to assert himself sort of within these Gothic family structures, that you were describing. But at the same time, this henshin, this prop, it's a melodramatic interpretation of what these day-to-day, very mundane experiences of being a child can feel like. And presumably, and this is only, a hypothesis, but sort of working off the assumption that something in the production of the show recognizes this to a certain extent, because they've made a very deliberate choice to keep the production low budget. You've got costumes are low budget, you have sound that is very low quality. And what this does, though, is it actually enables the toy then, which is limited, physically in terms of the sound quality it can produce and so on and so forth, but allows the toy to actually have the same sound and the same feeling and the same texture as what the child is seeing on screen, which is a huge part of, yes, the marketing of the show, but also in terms of the emotional investment of its audience, I think, in the show and in its use of the toy. So, rather than having the toy, as is the case in a lot of shows, rather than having a toy sort of being transmediated and simplified into something else, it's the same. It's the same thing. And in addition to this, we've seen in Kamen Rider that they're using the movements, the choreography that aren't over the top. That you don't need a stunt double to do this. Kids can do this movement. And I think we'll actually link a video at the bottom as well, where you can see, in this case, an adult, but going through all the different choreography for these transformations that the heroes go through over the years. So it's something that is deliberately done so that people can reenact it and can go through those moves themselves using the belt. And I guess we're positing in terms of melodrama that these moments of music and movement are effective. This is a normal part of melodrama, and it's what creates the show's structures of feeling, if you want to borrow the term from Raymond Williams. But what Kiva does with this toy is that it carries the effective loading of the show over through its sound and through its functionality. So the structures for feeling from the show kind of are embodied in this toy, and the child's experience maybe also watching the show becomes portable in a unique way. So the question for me then was, okay, well, what happens to the different spaces that the child acts in when these structures of feelings become portable? And this is where I want to draw on the idea of play as third space. So the third space of play integrates a child's different spatial and temporal experiences. And there have been a lot of different variations on the concept of third space, but it is essentially a third realm that brings together knowledge systems in a way that cannot be reduced to any one of those systems. So, for example, in our case, we might imagine a child who is engaging in imagination play that's based on Kiva, say in the schoolyard. Now, this play sort of straddles a discourse of home, where they might have watched the show, and it straddles a discourse of the peer social group at the school or the institutional discourse of education at the school. But it is neither truly one nor the other. It's something different. It's something third. Now, because the toy is mobile, it carries this effective loading into the moment of play, wherever that might be. And it therefore becomes part of how the child negotiates their experience of self within and in between these different discourses and their associated places. So, for instance, the home, the living room, the TV room, or the playground, the schoolyard, whatever. Now, another idea that we had thinking about this concept was that even if you accept one overarching cultural construction of childhood, even within this, any given child exists in multiple discourses across time and across space. So childhood in that sense is a state that is characterized by a sense of self that is both multiple and which may also be dissonant. So if you think about it, sort of each place offers a dominant set of behavioral codes, as well as its own dominant media ecology. I think of the school with the blackboard and the books versus the home, perhaps with the television or the parent reading to the child. Now, because the child is constantly expected to act in these different spaces, and also is expected to pass through different socially determined, sometimes quite arbitrary life stage transformations, they may experience affective dissonance. And so he's going to talk about this a little more, what we mean by the term affective dissonance in terms of childhood.
Yeah, so just briefly, affective dissonance arises from this experience of there being a difference or a gap between the sense of self and the socially constructed condition of possibility. So who you feel you are who you feel you have the possibility to be, who others expect you to be. And this really relates to that melodramatic crisis that Gledhill talks about, quote, where an emergent feeling or perception is blocked by the perspectives and manipulations of others, by constraints of social codes, or the inadequacy of available socio-expressive forms, end quote. And this is a really key theme in Kiva. So the protagonist is forced to be someone that his parents have kind of imagined into being. And that's in contradistinction to what he feels is his true self, and different again from the person he wants to be. And although struggling with these kind of issues about vampire slaying isn't going to be an issue for most 5-year-olds, filling a gap between sort of who you feel yourself to be and the good boy your parents are entreating you to be, or the clever girl your teacher tells you you are, is kind of a relatable manifestation of the same affective dissonance. And the dissonance of childhood is therefore fundamentally a Gothic experience that's finding its expression in melodramatic excess.
Yeah, exactly. And as we've argued now a couple of times, using the toy, this child can enact this sort of melodramatic excess through the third space of play that connects the child's experience with the different affordances of the spaces in which they act. So there's another quote which I really like from Clara Hemingway, and she notes that affect works to mark the ordinary through fantasy, so that how we see and engage with the other is already suffused with a meaning, dualistic and precisely not free. Now, in this case, the other I'm talking about is really the spaces that the child acts in. So if you think about it, the child's engagement with ordinary sites of childhood, whether it be, the school, the playground, the home, whatever, it's coloured, it's already influenced through the lens of the melodramatic effect of their play or of their media consumption, in this case of Kiva. So this very sort of ordinary plastic toy, which you can get at department stores in Japan, is viewed and it's engaged with in a certain way by the child because it carries this affective loading that's been created by Kiva's Gothic melodrama, by the use of this melodramatic mode in Kiva. And what we've argued is that this affective loading is perfectly attuned to the experience of being a child. And I think Sophie came up with a wonderful expression for this. She calls it the Gothic trajectory of childhood. Yeah.
There's so much more there that we need to unpack, but hopefully you will be able to find something in published form from us soon. So it's been great to have you, Ruth. I hope this won't be the last time you join us.
Well, at the conference at the latest.